Hi, welcome to another episode of the Colson Boutique Show. It has been a while, but good things come to those who wait. And fortunately today, we have with us a very influential guest within the wine world, not just in England and Europe, but internationally, as you will find out. He has joined us this morning. He's in the middle of crushing his grapes from his English vineyard, Denbies. If I could present this time none other than Mr. John Worontschak. John, good morning. How are you?
Hi. Well, thanks.
Good. So, obviously, with regards to yourself, you were born and raised in Australia and you started your wine experiences in Australia. Could you tell us a bit more about that?
I was born in Adelaide to Ukrainian parents. They came out after World War II, fortunately, and I had a pretty normal Australian upbringing, surfing and scuba diving and all that sort of thing. And when I was at university, I went to University of Adelaide to do geology, and fortunately, there was a little place called Petaluma up the road, and I got a weekend and holiday job there, which was probably the first of a series of very fortuitous events because, the two guys there, Brian Crozer and Dr. Tony Jordan, sort of icons, revolutionised the Australian wine industry and really set, I think, the world on fire.
Okay, and through what era was that? I believe that was 70s, 80s, around that time, or just prior to that?
My first job was at Petaluma. I was hand labelling bottles for the 1976 Chardonnay, Petaluma Chardonnay, and so I was there for the 1977 vintage, which I believe was the first or the second vintage that Brian Crozer had done there with the Petaluma label.
Wow. Okay, and obviously with regards to the culture of the 70s and 80s in wine and in specifically Australia, what was it like, say, compared to the rest of the world at that time?
At that stage, I didn't really know a hell of a lot about the rest of the world, but the Australian wine industry was in tumultuous change at the time. Most of the winemakers were family, untrained, scientifically, and then to start working at Petaluma with Crozer and Jordan, who they set up the Wagga Wagga School of Enology. And at that stage, there was only two places you could go, Wagga, which was a degree course, and Roseworthy, which wasn't a degree course. Okay. And then I thought, because working at Petaluma, all wineries were like that. And looking back on it, they were so incredibly fastidious. I mean, you could eat off the floor. It was you spent all of your time cleaning, and they were using things like sloped yeast, because there was no biotech in those days. There was no dried yeast or something. So they were sloping their own yeast strains. R2 was the big one in those days, and they were doing crazy things like fermenting, keeping Riesling cold until the winter and fermenting in the winter, very clean juice. They had all these axioms which produced the best wine in the world, as I thought at the time, some of which now seem pretty outdated and pretty simple, but just like very clean juice, protecting from oxygen and very cool fermentations. And then just being, as I say, fastidious in every single aspect of the winemaking process from a scientific basis.
Yes. All right. Very interesting there. And obviously from there, you decided to go traveling. I believe you traveled for around 6 years doing vintages in California, France and Australia. When did that begin? Was that in the 80s?
I ended up going to Wagga because Crozer sort of suggested it. And so I spent there until getting the winemaking degree until 84, and I did a vintage. I did about 18 months, 2 years at Campbell's Winery. Again, I mean, at the time, you can imagine, it was in Rutherglen. We were making port and Tokay and Muscat. And again, surrounded by icons. We used to go to a place called Mrs. Hoppy's every second Tuesday in Corowa. And there'd be Bill Chambers, Mick Morris, just legends. And we'd have like fish and chips for starters and steak and chips for the main. And then maybe a sort of a 90-year-old muscat to finish off the evening. It was Halican days. And so I did that, and then a few sort of vintage jobs at Yalumba and Penfolds, what have you. And then I decided to start travelling. It was 85, my first vintage in California at Clos du Bois. Again, I didn't realise it was an iconic kind of winery, but with John Hawley was a winemaker there, and at that stage it wasn't hugely different from the Australian industry, much less fastidious than Crozer was in terms of monitoring everything, but still making some pretty good wines for the time.
Yes.
Although now they'd be considered over-oaked and overblown, in those days it was pretty exciting.
When you was going between or from California to France to Australia, was there any significant differences that you noticed in terms of their approach to wine or their winemaking skills or their attitude or philosophy, how specific wines or wines in general should be made and who should consume them, etc.?
Yeah, I guess the first real taste I had of very different culture was the 85 winter harvest, or the 85 Northern Hemisphere harvest at Hugel's in Alsace.
Okay.
Again, Johnny Hugel, another icon. I seem to have landed in all these places where there was some pretty interesting characters. And so I did 2 vintages at the Hugel's working with Mark Hugel. Interestingly, he had just finished a vintage in Australia, and he came over and changed all the winemaking at Hugel's. Similarly, he fell in love with the process of very cold, clean fermentations and aromatic yeast strains and what have you, which nobody liked. so he went back to the old ways, and eventually, which seemed to make more wines with more sort of vinosity and more character. But yeah, doing those 2 harvests at Hugel's gave me a taste of sort of European ideas, and starting on the road to thinking, well, maybe we don't know everything. When I left, I thought, well, that was it. I sort of knew it. No one in the old world had a clue what was going on, and
sure.
Wines were funky and strange.
Yes.
So but then tasting some of the older Hugel wines with Mark Hugel, I think, well, actually, there's some characters here that are really interesting. And then having some nice Vendange Tardive from years gone by was also pretty special.
Good experience. Nice.
And so I guess then from there I travelled. I did 6 years, I think, just doing hemisphere hopping and travelling around the place. After Clos de Bar in California, I came to UK just as Australians do, and met my current wife. And then we started travelling. So we did 6 years. I worked at Penfolds for 3 years in Australia, in Yenda and Loxton and the Barossa. Again, picking up invaluable experience. Yeah. And then doing the Northern Hemisphere, and in between would stop in India or China or Eastern Europe or somewhere to have a bit of a holiday. Mm-hmm. And then in 1988, I came across a chap by the name of John Layton, who had an English vineyard called the Thames Valley Vineyard. That was in Berkshire.
Wow.
And so I was working in London, temping, and decided to do a vintage with him.
Okay.
Which was my first taste of English wine.
Wow.
Which wasn't very nice.
No, I can imagine, because today, obviously, with your wines in particular, you can tell they're very refined and, up to where they need to be in terms of quality, for sure. And compared to what it would have been in the early 90s, what would an English wine taste like back in the early 90s?
Well, there's the old adage, of course, how many men does it take to drink a bottle of English wine? Right. So 5, 3 to hold him down, and the other one to pour it down his throat. Yeah. The wines were awful. They were generally very green and bitter. Okay. They were sweetened. They were often oxidised. They were sweetened up with Suss Reserve, right, and put into hock bottles with Germanic labels. And generally, when I first got here, I bought a whole bunch of them and to try to find out what the story was, and couldn't get anything out of it. No. So I went to New York State to have a look, because they were a bit ahead. But I mean, fortuitously again, or serendipity, I managed to get into the English wine industry at a stage where there's not a lot of competition in terms of quality, and I introduced my quite simple and basic Australian winemaking techniques, and it's been clean, cold fermentation, as we said before, and just started winning everything. The Gore Brown Trophy like 5 or 6 years in a row, and
wow, congratulations.
It was really exciting times, and that was when I guess I got a lot of publicity, international as well. I had Australian film crews coming out and saying what's going on in England. I mean, every few years in England there's there's the emergence of English wine,
Yes.
and that was probably the second or third time it was, it has emerged.
Wow.
So that was pretty exciting times and really interesting. I set up a small company called Harvest Wine Group and consulted for 13 vineyards and contract wine made at the Thames Valley Vineyard, and then set up a little company called Harvest Wine Group, which was a marketing concern. So we actually got these 13 vineyards wines into a lot of shops like Threshers and a lot of places that don't exist anymore, and we did well there. But what the problem turned out to be was they just sat on the shelf, and we had no ability or capability of helping them, get consumed by the consumer.
Yes.
So although it was positive in terms of getting distribution, we didn't actually sell very much wine to people.
Okay. And you mentioned, obviously, and you touched upon there, coming over to the UK, and that's where you met your wife, and eventually you settled down in the UK around 1990, where you set up the Harvest Wine Consultancy, a UK wine consultancy at the Thames Valley Vineyard. How did that opportunity come across, and how did you find your years there to benefit you?
So, because of the publicity and the quality of the wines we were producing for Thames Valley Vineyard and for our contract clients, I got sort of some notoriety, and then started tasting for Wine Magazine and getting a bit more involved in the London scene. So again, very fortunately, I ended up in London, which is a place where you can really learn about wine.
Massively.
And it was very eye-opening at the time, and so I was there for 10 years or so. But in 1993 was the first of my flying winemaking experiences, and so I went to the Czech Republic to make some Grüne Veltliner and some Blaufränkisch for Tesco's. And in those days, they put your winemaker's name on the label.
Okay.
So that was the first one. So that was in October 93, and I've been pretty much travelling non-stop since then. And a lot for Tesco's in the early days, and then through contacts started consulting to wineries around the world in terms of production, and I've been doing that ever since, until lockdown.
Wow. And you make a couple of interesting points though in terms of how you've been travelling around the world, and you're in some very historic, traditional winemaking countries such as Moldova, and some very unique winemaking countries such as Mexico, Israel, so on and so forth. How did those opportunities come about? Was that something you saw as a challenge, like you may have done with, producing your English wines back in the early 90s, or was that something you was approached about and you thought, I like a challenge, I could put these wines on the map, let me show you what I'm capable of?
Yeah, I to be fair, I have been involved in pretty much most regions in Italy and France, and Germany as well.
Yes.
A bit in Spain, but I think for whatever reason, I've become sort of poster boy for strange places, which again, it's worked to my favour in many ways because, for instance, I went to South Africa in '94, just after Mandela won the presidency. And that was really interesting. Again, learning about cultures of place. I really love South Africa. It's a beautiful country. But at the time, because of apartheid, they just were comparing themselves amongst themselves. They had no international perspective. Yeah. And so, again, you could go into a country and make big changes. And so, wines would taste totally different in those days. They were somehow fixated on sort of very bitter extracted pinotage that you had to put in the fridge to drink cold. And to watch that, I've been going to South Africa ever since, and I just recently stopped, and to watch the evolution to where they are now, which is, they know exactly what they're doing. They're for the forefront of interesting wine styles, and
definitely,
the young winemakers, and the, just the zoo crew, and they're doing fantastic things.
Yes.
So that was good, and then Russia as well. I went to Russia in 2002 for the first time, still working out there. in 2000, you couldn't imagine what they
No, that's
knew.
wine.
Yeah. I mean, they're just undrinkable. I mean, to the point where, the first thing I did was just measure the dissolved oxygen levels in the wine, and they were like 9 milligrams per litre, which I didn't know was possible. That's super saturated, right? So all the winemakers used to drink wines out of tank because they still weren't too bad, but once they're in bottle, they'd be totally knackered.
Wow.
And the whole concept of tasting, I mean, no one spat any wine out, and there was always sort of salami and cheese during wine tastings, and then just their ability to talk nonsense was sort of, this wine has got flowers and petals and what have you, and it's just knackered, you know, it's just undrinkable. And again, so to go in there, and then I started working at a place called Miskako in Novorossiysk, and we just, again, like in England, which I'm making wine, everyone's going, what's going on there? This tastes normal.
Sure.
This tastes okay.
Yes.
Currently I'm working at a place called Fanagoria, which is a 30,000-ton winery. And the owner, one of the owners there, Peter Romanishin, he... very dedicated to quality, and we're making some really good wines, not just okay wines, but really good wines, and beating a lot of these little boutiques owned by the oligarchs, all the friends of Putin, in open competition within a 30,000-ton winery with like sort of 3,000 or 4,000 barrels.
Yeah.
That's been good. And it's also the beauty about working in Russia is that because I could speak Ukrainian, it wasn't very difficult to actually master the lingo, which is
it helps massively, especially
really
in Russia. They respect that to such high standard if you can speak, like you said, their lingo. Otherwise, it can be a bit hostile trying to do business. But it was kind of sidetracking there, because you make an interesting point. With the people you work with over in Russia, obviously a lot of these French vineyards, as an example, we've seen the wave of Southeast Asian investors, business magnates take over and want to, make a lot of French wine. Because of course, back in Southeast Asia, wine is extremely popular. With the people you work with and the other people out in Russia that your competition, so like these boutique oligarchs, etc. Is the key working with people who are Russian, because they might understand like the viticulture and how the temperatures may help produce certain qualities of grapes, or is it best to call, say, the so-called experts in who may not have experienced such climates as Russia but know how to work in?
Yeah, it's a good question. Usually in the first couple of years, because in those days I was doing maybe 12 vintages at a time, sort of thing. I would get young winemakers either from Australia or from New Zealand or from somewhere trained, and they would actually be there for the harvest and be my ears and eyes, and because you have to break a few. Eggs to get this to work, and also break down the old culture of the way they do things, and that if you're not there, they just slip back into it. And the best way to be able to achieve what you want to achieve is to have a owner who employs everybody there to back you 100%, and then they will do what you say. But if you don't have that backing, then it becomes much more difficult, and it's better to have somebody there for your eyes and ears during the harvest. But having said that, that changes after a few years, because they see the difference in quality. They feel that, and then they become engaged in improving themselves, and so the winemakers now in Russia they're all Russian, or one's Moldovan, but that's a similar sort of concept.
Yes.
Moldova was about 10 years ahead of Russia, 10 or 15 years ahead of Russia in terms of modernization of their wine industry, because they started in the 90s, I think the early 90s. I think Penfolds went out to Moldova and did joint ventures with Hugh Ryman and all those sort of people. So they already had moved on. So yeah, that's the way it works, really.
Brilliant. All right. And something that might be an interesting concept that people may not, or our viewers and listeners and clients may not be familiar with, is the fly and winemaking, which you were part of for almost a decade. When people hear fly and winemaking, they're thinking, what exactly is fly and winemaking? But when you look into it, it's a very good initiative that has a lot of benefits. So how would you be able to best describe fly and winemaking? And could you give us, say, what a typical season was for yourself being a fly and winemaker?
there's two real definitions of it, I suppose. There's a flying winemaker who goes and does vintages, which is what I was doing for those 6 years. And you go there and you work, and hopefully you can change a few things and put forward a few ideas, depending on who the chief winemaker you're working for is. And that's a lot of flying winemaking. But I sort of moved on from that and became more of a consultancy, because I'd fly in, taste everything, have a conversation, and also you start looking at the management structure of these companies and whether maybe the winemaker would be a better winery manager, and then his assistant would be a better winemaker. You can shuffle people around, or instigate different techniques where you have chief red, chief white, things that they didn't think of doing before. So it becomes more of a global picture. For instance, I've been working in Mexico for 25 years, and in Israel for 25 years, and in the same company. And so, frankly, there's not a lot more apart from having an outside overview coming in from the outside. And the beauty about doing that in so many wineries, from Canada to China and everywhere in between, is that, and something that they don't possibly realise, and we keep it just between you and me, is that you actually learn more from these people than they do from you, because everyone's doing something is different. The soils are different, the grapes are different, the processes, the equipment are different, and then you see something and you go, wow, that works here, and that might work over there, or that really doesn't work here, and that. So you're actually learning all the time, not only about winemaking but also just cultures, just the different countries. I mean, Brazil, I worked in Brazil for 4 or 5 years, and that was just fantastic. I mean, it's sort of like this indigenous population mixed with sort of Italians and Germans, and the whole thing is just fascinating.
Wow.
And then the ridiculous climate there, and the sort of blue vineyards from the copper sprays, and everywhere's got stories.
Yeah, for sure. All right.
I should have been jotting them down and written a book.
Your own memoirs.
Yeah.
You never know. Could be a thing.
Well, I've forgotten 90% of everything over.
All right. And moving on to Four Corners Consultancy, which was an international consultancy, started at the turn of the millennium. What was the approach there? What was the initiative there?
Well, the Harvest Wine Group, that all started really in Clos du Bois, because at the end of the season I said to the winemaker, you got serious health and safety issues here. I mean, catwalks and plugs and stuff like that. You should really look at it. It was in the car park. This was at Clos du Bois before it moved. It was in Hillsburg. And he said, okay, well, do me a report. I said, well, okay, but I'll have to charge you for it. He said, okay, how much do you want? I said, well, $200. He said, okay. And I thought that was a week's work, because I was getting $5 an hour, and so that's 40 hours work, and it took me a few hours. It was all handwritten because there was no computers or anywhere to type it. So I sent him an invoice, which I've still got the carbon copy of, for $200 he paid. And I thought, well, this is probably better than working with your hands if you work with your mind. Yeah. And so that started. And so then when I got to the UK, I didn't work for Thames Valley Vineyard. I consulted for them on a consultancy basis. So I'd invoice them and they'd pay me, and I set up the contract winemaking service where I would bill the clients and then pay for the use of equipment, which is basically what I still do today at Denby's Vineyard with Litmus Wines. And so Four Corners Consultancy progressed from that, because it became a more of an international thing. I was now working in South Africa and Canada and France and Germany and all over the place. And so I changed the company, made it a limited company, and changed the name to Four Corners. And then at one stage had even a Four Corners range of wines, which was selling in the UK for a bit, which was a bit ahead of its time, really. So it had my winemaking in different countries. We did Uruguay, we did Bordeaux, we did a few other places. Romania was another place, and they all had the same sort of Four Corners label on them.
Oh, wow. Do you think you may revisit that again, maybe, or try to bring it back?
What I didn't do, I think doing that, you take away any provenance, and I think in retrospect, if I did the marketing research beforehand, I probably would have realised that the general public don't want some brash Australian kid going around the world telling
what to do,
France what to do.
Understood.
And so even though I got it on the shelves again in Tesco's, wasn't a great success commercially.
Okay.
It was fun to do, but
Sure.
and it didn't cost me, but it wasn't the best thing in the world. But there's other brands that are doing it now, of course.
Sure.
So, you know.
You never know. You never know. Okay, so obviously with regards to that, you reference, of course, Litmus Wines Limited and Worontschak Wine Services Limited, which began from 2008 and is still present to this day. So what are the operations there?
Well, in 2008, I got together with Sam Harrop, and he had a consultancy business, and I had a consultancy business, and we joined our forces. It was in a bid to help the wineries we consulted for reach the market, and so to provide an overall service. And we did that. We set up in 2008. We changed the name. So I ended Four Corners and started with Litmus Wines, which was a UK-based company. Sam left in 2010 to go back to New Zealand. So I bought his shares, and we moved to Denby's Vineyard in Dorking, where they were our first major client, so we consult for them. So I'm the chief winemaker there. We make all their wines and we do their external sales. So to this day, we still do all their own labels for whoever, Lidl, Sainsbury's, M&S, everybody. And then also changed the focus of Litmus Wines to a contract winemaking service like was in Thames Valley. And we're now doing over 200 tonnes of contract wines at Denby's for various clients, and we rent the equipment at Denby's to do that. We also import biotech for wine industry, work closely with IOC there, do disgorging, do contract bottling. We're pretty much a service.
Denby's is beautiful because again, like when people think of a vineyard, they think, okay, I'll pay for a ticket, I'll get to sample 5 or 6 different wines, maybe have like a cheese board or charcuterie, and that's that. But there's more at Denby's than just that, isn't there? You've got the wedding packages you do, corporate events. What else can people expect?
Yeah, Denby's? Obviously I have nothing to do with that side of the business. It's owned by the White family, and they've got a fantastic business and fantastic business model. Not only the wine and the wineries, but they've got 2 or 3 restaurants. They do, as you say, weddings. They've got a brewery they lease there. They've got a farm shop. They have something like 300,000 people a year footfall. Wow. So it's a really successful, tight little business. I think there's about 120 employees, and we're just a part of that. We look after the sort of production of the wine, and as to this day, so we're picking this week.
Yes.
We began picking on Monday.
Beautiful, and an interesting one. Concept that I'm fully on board with was the Jinking, or is the Jinking company. Started in 2017 until present. And I remember, I think it was in my local Waitrose for that matter, and I remember seeing this bottle, Jinking, very beautiful label, very, very unique bottle in terms of it being gin and king. You look at it and it's a blend of gin making skills with wine making skills, and it's an infusion of both, which absolutely goes well as an aperitif and at dinner parties, so on and so forth. Where did you see that gap in the market? What for you was like, I need to create something Jinking? Why Jinking?
Okay, so well, firstly, just a little bit about Litmus. Since then, I've got 2 partners who we're equal shareholders of the company at the moment. It's Mike Florence and Matthew Elzinga, who are buddies. Yeah, we're good friends, so that works really well. Yes. One day, I came home from work at Litmus, and my wife Ruth was saying that she didn't know whether she wanted a glass of English sparkling wine or a glass of gin. What would it be like if you put 2 and 2 together? And so I rushed over to the off license and said we didn't have any gin. I bought some gin and put it in the sparkling wine, and it tastes like shit. And so I spent the next year sort of like playing, with concoctions and trying to work out how to do this. But the interesting thing was I sort of Googled it, and no one had ever done it before. Right. I mean, there's 1 or 2 cocktails with gin and sparkling wine, sure, but no one had done an RTD with gin and sparkling wine, so it was absolutely unique. So I went into the Litmus office and spoke to my buddies, and so what do you think about we explore this? And at the time, gin's booming, sparkling wine's booming, and lower alcohol's booming. So we thought, they both said, yes, let's do it. Yeah, let's go. And so, because it makes more sense taxation-wise, and then if we ever sell it, I set up the Ginking company, which we're also equal shareholders of, and worked out this recipe by which you can infuse gin, heavily infused gin, with botanicals that you want, and what you end up getting with is something which is really quite refreshing. Because wine, I love wine. I drink too much of it. But sometimes it's not that refreshing or not refreshing enough. Gin and tonic, nothing wrong with that. No. But it tastes like tonic water after a while. It's a bit simple.
That's true.
Whereas this, it's down to 8.5% alcohol, so you can swig it, and it's got the sort of complexity of wine and the interest of the botanicals, and so it kind of works. It's done very well so far. M&S, you would have tried it, not Waitrose, but we're in Morrison's and Tesco's, and just recently Lidl for a short period of time. We've sold to Sligro in the Netherlands. We're talking to Australia. We've sold in Singapore, cold storage. So it's out there. The problem, not the problem, but the thing that had to be overcome was the fact that the originals are made from English wine, which is very expensive and also a bit like rocking horse shit. There's not a lot of it around.
Yes.
And so we had to decide where we're going to go. If we're going to make this a large brand, we have to use European wine. So I came up with the concept of Mediterranean, and using Spanish wine with pine needles and having that sort of fresh, it's not rich scenery, but it's got a hint of rosemary and pine and all that sort of stuff in it. And that's quite good. And then the fourth variant we came up with was Botanica Italia, which has got vermouth type botanicals in it. It's got Angostura bark and gentian root and what have you. So that's a bit bitter. So there's four different things, and the story is like Lord Worontschak travelling around the world on sabbatical, goes to Italy and does this thing. So it's this sort of marketing hype going around it. Sure. As well. So hopefully one day somebody will come along and say, Mr. Worontschak, we want to buy your company, and then
I'm sure what happened. You hear about it a lot with these gin companies, which have been popping out, especially in the last, I think, year and a bit. So you got in before most people got in. So on that logic, fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
I wouldn't want to do it just yet because it's so much fun. But
sure.
I'm getting old.
Well, older or better,
maybe a bit wiser.
Yeah, but okay. Present situation, COVID. It's obviously for the economy has taken a bit of a battering, and there have been job losses and whatnot. We have found Colson Boutique, in fact, because people do consume wine, business has been actually very healthy as opposed to business going the other way. But for yourself and for the businesses you represent, how have you been doing?
Well, the Worontschak Wine Services, which is basically international consultancy, obviously that's gone down a bit, but it's also made me reconsider the whole concept of air miles and the planet, and sort of, is it really good to be a gold member of British Airways for 15 years and just travelling around so much, and you can do a lot less of that and doing a lot more Zoom tasting and things. So it's still going, but that's down big time. In terms of the Litmus wine range, which we haven't talked about yet, the English wines, they're doing very well in terms of online sales, but obviously the restaurants we're in, the IV, the sort of places in London, that's gone down, but sales of Litmus wines are keeping up. Jinking is going well, but every penny we make we reinvest into social media and marketing, and that to try to get it there. So that's never made any money. And the contract winemaking, all good, no change. So we're keeping our head above water, and we're managing to pay ourselves what we always have.
Okay. So with regards to Litmus wines, I've been able to try a number of them. Very, very delicious. And of course, when people do think of English wine, it will be Litmus, it will be the likes of Nye Timber, Chapeldown, etc. Are you satisfied with being in that group of very respected names, or are you striving to be the number one? So when people think English wine or even European wine, they're thinking Litmus, Element 20. Forget French Pinot Noir, we want Litmus Pinot Noir.
Yeah. I think the journey of learning my journey of learning about wine is really reflected in Litmus Wines, and from the things I was doing back at Thames Valley Vineyard. I mean, those wines were simple, and a lot of English wines still are. You can get very fragrant, fresh Bacchuses, very nice, a bit one-dimensional, but they're, and that's the kind of thing you do with that standard winemaking. But from 2010, when the first Element 20 Litmus wine was produced, I've been trying to up the game, up the ante, make them more food wines, make them more Northern European, more complex, and with incredible aging potential. Because with the kind of pHs and acidities we can get in the UK, if you've got good grapes to start with, the 2010, for instance, is 10 years old. English white wine is delicious now. It's probably better than it ever has been.
Agreed.
So the change in my winemaking style and thinking has gone a lot. These wines are 100% barrel aged. There's four in the range now. The Element 20, which is the first one, that's generally a combination of Chardonnay and Bacchus, 100% malolactic, barrel batonaged and very, very low sulfur regimes, minimal intervention. White Pinot Noir, which I decided to do that in 2011 because I had this one from Trentino. It was delicious, and that seems to work every year. Just wholeberry pressed, and it's white wine, but because it's from a red grape, you get huge sort of mouthfeel from it. The red Pinot Noir, which only do in years when it's capable, when you can find a vineyard which has got very ripe fruit. And then more recently the orange, which is annoyingly doing very well because it's no wood in there. It's just a fermented Bacchus on skins, and that's doing well. But to answer your question, the whole concept of Element 20 was to, if you say Lebanon, people go Chateau Moussard.
They do.
So I wanted that and still want that to be, if you're thinking of English still wine, forget the sparkling. So you've got United Timbers, whatever. If you want English still wine, it would be nice if people just thought Element 20. And that's what we're trying to go. So yes, we're trying to be number one and trying to do it well. And hopefully the results over the years have shown that we're consistent, we're making good wines. They sell off restaurants, but they're very small. I mean, it's 10,000 bottles a year. I mean, the whole full range. So it's a tiny bit of the business, but it's an important part of the business in the fact that our contract clients can see what we're capable of and aspire to that.
Brilliant. Brilliant. All right, a couple of quick fire questions, and then obviously I'll let you get on with the rest of what you need to do to carry on, vice versa as well. So you've had a lot of positive critical acclaim. Andrew Jefford of Decanter magazine, Jancis Robinson, Oz Clarke, all praising yourself in particular and the wines in which you're involved with. What is it for yourself being involved for the period of time that you have where you feel, okay, I'm going to rest my hat on that now. I've done all I've needed to do. This is my legacy.
I don't think that's going to happen.
Okay.
I think that I love my job. I love wine. I love work. I'm going to keep on doing it until the day I die. I'm not going to retire that I can see. I can't imagine what I'd do if I retired. The Litmus wine, I guess, is the ultimate, because that's when you've got full control from label design to the vineyard, and small volumes of very nice wine. And maybe when I'm old and dottery, that'll be the thing, and I can waste the millions made from Jinking on making overly expensive wine that nobody will pay for.
And would you plan on retiring within the UK, or maybe would you head back to Australia or a different country?
Well, it's funny, when I go back to Australia now, it is a foreign country. So I've been here for so long now, so 30 years. So I've always felt more European than Australian. So it would be definitely somewhere in Europe, probably in the southeast of England. I don't know, Leamington, somewhere. I don't know, somewhere nice.
Sure.
And then spend out the days there, maybe with a tiny vineyard, bit of just Pinot Noir, I guess. Just okay. If you're going to push me on, I'd say couple of hectares of 777 clone Pinot Noir, make a few barrels and share it amongst friends.
Sounds perfect. And is there any wine out there that is like your desert island wine What one that you've tried? Okay, 2-part question. One that you've tried that you would love to be left for 2 weeks on a desert island with, just so you can drink that, every day for 2 weeks straight. But also a wine that you've yet to come across that really is on your bucket list, so to speak.
Okay, so in the year 2000, I was making wine in the Marche. In Italy, and went to a restaurant, and we had a bottle of 1980 Villabuce Verdicchio. It was just unbelievably good. It was just everything you could possibly from wine. It was the closest thing to perfection, and it shouldn't be. An old Verdicchio shouldn't be. And so I bought. I think. The restaurant had 6 or 7 bottles left, so I bought those, took them home with me, thinking that I'd get there, and it was just the occasion.
Yes.
But it wasn't. Every single one of those bottles I savoured and enjoyed with good friends. And so the next time I was there, I actually found Villabucci and went to there and said, "Have you got any 1990?" And they said, "Well, no, we haven't, but if you have, we'll buy them from you." So that's the wine that really sticks in my mind. So it wasn't an expensive wine. I think I ended up paying €25 a bottle or something like that.
Okay.
So it was a remarkable wine. What I haven't tried, which I would like to, would be verticals of really good first growths. The kind of things that Jancis would do every Wednesday night.
Yes.
Have a really good. I mean, a 45, a 61. I've never done that. And I would like to just to see. What that's about. I mean, I've had first growths, obviously, but
sure. But 45, 61s
and not verticals.
Yeah, they're different class, aren't they? Different class. All right, and lastly, what is the future moving forward for yourself, Litmus Wines, and obviously the other business ventures you do have?
Litmus Wines and Jinking are the two most important businesses at the moment. Litmus Wines is doing very well. We have a lot of fun. We cook lunch every day. We've got a nice kitchen. We work hard and play hard. And whilst it's as enjoyable as it is, yes. I don't want that to stop.
Sure.
Jinking is a different thing because it's moving away from the concept of trying to maximise quality into getting something which you have to get your head around to maximising enjoyment, and then how to convey that enjoyment to the great unwashed, the sort of the public. So to that and the business side of that, I haven't got the business acumen to make a global brand. So sure. I have to import that. One of the many benefits about doing what I've done from working for DGB in South Africa, working for Penfolds in Australia, is seeing the corporate world and being part of it from the outside, realising I don't want to be part of that corporate world, but kind of understanding it. And I guess Jinking is the first thing which I've been part of creating, which is leading towards that kind of mentality. We have to think in a way which isn't, have I got enough money in the bank next week? It's like sort of sure. How much do we need to spend and to make the strategy to get there and to be successul, which is exciting, and yes. It's keeping me awake at night, and brilliant. It's and perhaps a bit younger than I am.
All right, understood. All right, so all exciting moving forward, which is great. So, all right, well, on that positive news, John, thank you very much for joining us today. Good luck with everything for the future. And obviously, again, getting to number one within the wine trade and eventually sending off Jinking as well. It's the next big thing for sure. But and thank you very much for joining us too. Until next time, all the best.